Good afternoon. Mm. Uh, Thank you. Please receive our apologies for the technical issue that delayed our event. What? This one. First of all, I would like to thank the Jeff support for this Minamata initial assessment report or project. The United National Industrial Development Organization, the UNITA, the project steering committee members, and also consultants who supported to implement this activity or to obtain this Minamata initial assessment report. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, Rwanda joined hands with the international community to address the triple-plenary crisis of pollution, climate change, and biodiversity loss. For instance, in 2004, Rwanda ratified 3 conventions that fall under chemical cluster with the ambition to protect human health and the environment from negative impact resulting of the use of harmful chemicals and poor management of hazardous waste. The Republic of Rwanda reports its Minamata initial assessment, which aims to generate baseline information and data on mercury, including the mercury inventory, in order to inform on the country's course of action regarding its obligations to the Minamata Convention. The country acceded to the Minamata Convention on Mercury on 29 June 2011, and the convention itself entered into force on 27 September 2011. This proves Rwanda's effort to address chemical pollution and promote the protection of human health and environment. Rwanda, in collaboration with UNIDO and UNITA, developed the Minamata Initial Assessment Report with the ambition of having current national status on mercury stock, mercury use, and its emission. Following its outcome, this is the right time to present the obtained results from the assessment conducted. I'm happy of being with you today as the concerned stakeholders partnered with us from the day one, from the day we initiated this journey to implement this project. This day marks the outcome of our efforts that led us to the final initial assessment report with concrete information and recommendations, as well as intervention needed to make mercury an history in our country. With support from UNEP, one of the main parts of this report is mercury inventory that helped us to quantify the mercury use and its emission. The inventory revealed that Rwanda's total mercury releases by source category stood at 19,500 and 58.85 kilogram per year of mercury. Lot of quantity of this mercury is emitted into the air. Another part is released in water, and another quantity in the land, while the remaining quantity was partitioned to byproducts and impurities. And other are emitted in waste, and the other part went into sector-specific treatment or the disposal. With the Minamata initial assessment result, the institutional intervention plan was also provided to inform and guide our stakeholders on the way toward making mercury the history. We hope that every concerned sector will be on the forefront in collective effort to shift to the alternative solution in place to save our health and environment from the negative impact of the use and poor management of mercury containing waste. Let this assessment be a catalyst for our institutions to shift to the alternative solution and the green technology that will reduce the use of mercury where possible, as well as reduce its impact. We are deeply concerned about the continuous use and release of mercury. Let's join our effort to the institutions that have already started this journey. We look forward working closer to end the use of mercury, or to end the pollution of mercury in our country. Thank you again. I wish everyone a fruitful workshop.
Thank you very much for the welcome remarks. I now return to the middle. The middle is the implementing agency of the Minamata Assessment and National Action Plan project. Unity journey, the middle phrase, article to control as an implementing agency for REMA to achieve the objectives of the project. Dear Hellman, the floor is yours.
Let's speak now.
We can hear you.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. I will just go straight into my closing remarks. I'll be reading these closing remarks on behalf of the project manager, Ozunimi Itilian. I am the project associate, the unit of focal point on the MIA and NAP Rwanda, and it's an honor for me to be here today representing UNIDO and my project manager to close this this report. So, Honorable Director General of Rwanda Environment Management Authority, Juliet Kabira in absentia, distinguished guests, representatives of media organizations, ladies and gentlemen, good day. I would like to express my profound gratitude to the government of the Republic of Rwanda for its continued commitment to promoting the responsible and sustainable utilization of the chemicals in the industrial and artisanal sectors, particularly on mercury, through its designated agency, Rwanda Environment Management Authority, REMA. I would like to sincerely thank REMA for their collective efforts from the initial conceptualization of the Minamata Initial Assessment MIA project to the organization of this inaugural event. I am delighted to be present at the launch of this significant report, which I am confident will be a key element in safeguarding human health from the detrimental effects of mercury. May I also convey my appreciation to UNITA, our sister organization and co-executing partner, for their enormous support and collaboration on this project. Humanity currently faces a triple planetary crisis compounded by the consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic and geopolitical tensions such as the Russian-Ukrainian war, resulting in a multitude of economic, social, and environmental issues. As a result, the government of Rwanda, like many nations, must take their commitments to national determined contributions, NDCs, and multilateral environmental agreements, MIAs, more seriously than ever before. UNIDO recognizes that the Republic of Rwanda is party to various environmental conventions. All of the ratified treaties share the common goal of protecting human health and the planet from the harmful effects of poor management of chemicals and their waste. The Rwandan government ratification of the Minamata Convention on Mercury demonstrates its commitment to the elimination of chemical waste. Being a party to the convention, Rwanda will benefit from support in its efforts to control mercury use. The Minamata Initial Assessment MIA report provides a comprehensive analysis of the state of mercury in Rwanda, enabling the government to identify the most pressing issues and formulate plans to reduce and, where feasible, eliminate the consumption of mercury and its associated products. Specifically, the MIA report identifies major data gaps, main priorities for further assessment, populations at risk, and provides a review of the country's policy, regulatory, and institutional framework, awareness-raising strategies, and an implementation plan. The MIA started in December of 2021 and was concluded in September of 2022. Consultants collected in-depth information on the mercury sources in Rwanda in cooperation with REMA and all national stakeholders. The MIA report actually reflects the current situation, concerns, and opinions of stakeholders on the management of mercury in Rwanda. The MIA provides its framework for safeguarding human health from the adverse impacts of mercury. The report focused on 6 objectives to gain a better understanding of the mercury situation in various regions of Rwanda, with the aim of safeguarding human health and protecting the environment. The implementation of the report marks the beginning of Rwanda's progress towards the proper management of mercury, paving the way for the conservation of natural resources, the prevention of pollution, and the reduction of land degradation. I am confident that the recommendations in the report will not only help to protect human health, but also to contribute to the sustainable economic growth of Rwanda. I would like to end by reiterating our gratitude to REMA and all the stakeholders who have contributed to this process, be it through attending the National Steering Committee meetings, workshops, or by carrying out various activities linked to the preparation of the MIA Rwanda report. On this wonderful occasion, on behalf of UNIDO, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to the Global Environmental Facility as a financial mechanism through which the project is funded. UNIDO stands ready to work closely with the government of Rwanda, the private sector, and donor agencies to advance the inclusive, clean production agenda and sustainable use of natural resources and the prevention of pollution and land degradation in Rwanda. I wish you a very fruitful day. I am confident that this event will guide our future endeavors. Even though we started with some technical issues, but I believe that this is a starting point for a better future on the management of waste. Thank you for your attention. On behalf of my project manager, Ozunimi Itilian Helmin Igocom, thank you very much.
Thank you. For the remarks. I now turn to the United Nations Institute for Training and Research. So UNITA trained Rwanda's experts to prepare the MIA report, particularly on the UNEP toolkit that was used in quantifying the mercury during the preparation of mercury inventory. During this work, UNITA provided technical guidance and input to ensure that the Minamata initial assessment report that we are launching today meets the UNEP requirements. I now invite Guillaume, the UNITA coordinator, to deliver his remarks. Mr. Guillaume Cazor is a consultant in chemicals and waste management, working for UNITA and other stakeholders. He assists countries in implementing the Montreal Protocol on substances that deplete the ozone layer and Minamata Convention on Mercury, as well as the project related to the management of plastics and information technology and electric waste. Guillaume holds an engineering degree in information technology management and a master's degree in European studies. Mr. Guillaume, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I hope you can all hear me and see me.
Sound and clear.
Everyone. So again. And together with Jacob, I will be representing UNITA today at this workshop. So the Mercury Initial Assessment project was undertaken in Rwanda by the Rwanda Environmental Management Authority in coordination with national institutions and partners and with the support of UNIDO and UNITA. It is part of the support provided by the Global Environment Facility to facilitate the rapid entry into force of the Convention and its effective implementation by countries. As an enabling activity, the Minamata initial assessment process has the same goal and structure in all countries. Its main objective is to establish a national basis for future work to implement the Minamata Convention on Mercury. Thanks to the work carried out under the MIA, Rwanda has been able to establish a national profile for mercury, identifying sources of emissions and release. Rwanda has also been able to point out to the structures, institutions, and legislation available or needed to implement the Convention, as well as identify the barriers that will hinder implementation of the Convention and propose priorities for action. UNITA is confident that the work carried out will help future work on the Convention and hopes that the country will succeed in eliminating the risks caused by mercury. Without further ado, I hope that we will all have a fruitful discussion together today and wish you an excellent dissemination workshop. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the remark. I now invite UNITA expert who supported Rwanda during the preparation of the Minamata initial assessment. RIZ was one of the national experts.
Can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Thank you very much. My name is Aloysia, as Patrick mentioned. I'm going to present to you findings of the policy, regulatory, and institutional framework assessment of the Minamata initial assessment. I go directly to the findings. I start with the legal review, then I will end with the institutional assessment. So the hierarchy of laws is as follows in Rwanda. The constitution is the supreme law in Rwanda. It is followed by laws, international treaties, agreement, and others. The management of mercury in Rwanda is not only aligned with a single legal instrument at national level. Therefore, we will see that each of the articles of the convention is, let me share the screen, please. Thank you. Yes, so each of the articles of the convention is not only aligned with only a single registration at national level. So we are going to go through this. And the constitution was found to be aligned with overall with the articles of the convention, but also we found that some activities mentioned in the convention do not take currently place in Rwanda, but in the recommendation there is a need to set rules and regulations concerning these activities to ban the future use of these. These include primary mercury mining and initial processing, manufacturing processes in which mercury or mercury compound are used,
but also artisanal and small-scale gold mining, known as ACGM. So if I say ACGM, I'm referring to artisanal and small-scale gold mining. Processing in which mercury amalgamation is used, but also coal-fired power plants, smelting, roasting, and processes used in production of non-ferrous metals. Starting with Article 3 of the Convention on Mercury Supply, Sources and Trade. In Rwanda, the ministerial order listing chemicals and other polluting substances that are not permitted also mentioned mercury on its list. Therefore, there is no gap in this ministerial order. While the law on modalities of protection and conservation and promotion of the environment, in its Article 45, talking about chemicals and waste, there is a lack of effective implementation of this article, and mercury was not directly mentioned in this article. The law on exploration, processing, or trading of any mineral or quarry also does not ban primary mining of mercury. Therefore, under this Article 3 of the Convention on Mercury Supply, Sources and Trade, the recommendation is to ban new primary mercury mining and issue a legal instrument restricting import and export of mercury. But also there is a need to raise awareness and train the public, workers and professionals on any of the revised legal instruments that incorporate mercury. Regarding the Article number 4 of the Convention on Mercury Added Products, the law governing chemicals manufacturing, importing, distribution, use, storage, sale, and disposal, and an associated ministerial order to this law. It was found that they lack effective implementation and there is a limited capacity to test for mercury in agrochemicals. So I think we lost the connection. People online, can you hear me? Okay, thank you. So let us continue. Also about this Article 4 of the Convention on Mercury-Added Products, the law governing the registration of pesticide, laboratory, and cleaning chemicals does not explicitly mention mercury-based agrochemicals, while the law governing electricity also lacks specific provisions that regulate the use and elimination of some of the mercury-added products mentioned by the Convention, such as batteries, switches, relays, and lamps. The ministerial order also determining the list of cosmetics whose use is prohibited, and the law relating to the regulation and the inspection of food and pharmaceutical products. Also, these two instruments lack effective implementation, and there is a lack of capacity to test for mercury in cosmetic products, and a lack of capacity to deal with import and export and cleaning activities involving product with mercury. So the recommendation regarding fire implementation of the Article number 4 of the Convention is that there is a need to ban the manufacture, import, and export of mercury-added products listed in the Convention, except where exclusion is specified as mentioned in the Convention, or where Rwanda has registered exemption pursuant to Article number 6 of this Convention. There is a need also to establish a control on the import and export of denture amalgams, which are also specified in the Convention to be containing mercury in order to phase down their use. There is also a need of a legal instrument to discourage future manufacture and distribution of new mercury product types, but also a need to raise awareness and train the public, workers, and professionals on any of the revised legal instruments. Regarding Article number 7 of the Convention on Artisanal and Small-Scale Gold Mining, the law on exploration, exploitation, processing, or trading of any mineral or a quarry lack provisions on managing intentional or unintentional mercury releases to the environment from gold mining activities, but also the law setting modalities for protection, conservation, and promotion of the environment, as mentioned earlier in its Article 45 on chemicals and waste, it lacks effective implementation. So the recommendation here for this article to be fully implemented, there is a need to enforce existing regulations to ensure non-derivation of mercury or mercury compound from other sectors to a CGM, and develop a strategy to ensure that mercury amalgamation is not used in a CGM sector in Rwanda. but also raise awareness and train the public, miners, and professionals on any of the revised instruments. Regarding the Article number 8 of the Convention on Emissions, the law on preservation of air quality and prevention of air pollution lacks also effective implementation and provisions on smelting and roasting processes used in production of non-ferrous metals, cement clinkers, which are the areas that are known to also possibly use mercury or release mercury. And this law also lacks definition of mercury emission sources and control measures on mercury emission sources. While the ministerial order relating to air pollutant emissions also lack provisions on point sources defined in the convention. The National Environment and Climate Change Policy also have a limited progress in generating, supporting regulations, guidelines, and standards covering mercury emissions. So the recommendation here for Article number 8 of the Convention on Emissions to be implemented, there is a need to regulate all activities that are potential sources of mercury emissions through elaboration of mercury emissions limits from relevant sources, but also require the use of best techniques and best environmental practices to control emissions and develop a multi-pollutant control strategy that would deliver co-benefits control of mercury emissions, and propose alternative measures to reduce emissions from relevant sources, and finally develop and maintain an inventory of emissions from any relevant sources. But also there is a need to put in place a routine ambient air monitoring to assess the impact of transboundary mercury pollution, because it is a chemical that can freely move through air and water, and this may have significant impact on human health and the environment. Regarding the Article number 9 of the Convention on Releases, the ministerial order determining the list of water pollutants lack on its list the elemental mercury and organic mercury as defined by the Convention, but also there is absence of standards on mercury in soil waste and sediments, and there's no definition on mercury releases sources and control measures of mercury releases. Regarding the specification on agriculture liming materials, there is inadequate enforcement of this standard. So the recommendation here is to regulate all activities that are potential sources of mercury through elaboration of mercury releases limits from relevant sources, but also require the use of best available techniques and best environmental practices to control emissions from relevant sources, no later than 5 years as recommended by the Convention, and develop a multi-pollutant control strategy that would deliver co-benefits for control of mercury emissions, and propose alternative measures to reduce emissions from the relevant sources, but also develop and maintain an inventory of emissions from any relevant source. Regarding Article number 10 of the Convention on Environmental Sound Interim Storage of Mercury Other than Waste, none of the existing legal instrument addresses this issue, including the law on environmental protection and the ministerial order on chemicals, and the law and ministerial order on agrochemicals. So the recommendation here is to adopt regulation and institutional mechanisms for the regulation of interim storage of mercury and mercury compounds other than mercury waste. So these instruments should also consider the key mercury sectors that are likely to use mercury, and must stipulate provisions for interim storage facilities. Regarding this article also, that was the article on the environmental sound interim storage of mercury other than waste. So regarding the mercury waste in Article number 11 of the Convention, modalities of the law on modalities of protection, conservation, and promotion of the environment still, as mentioned earlier, lack effective implementation, and the ministerial order establishing special regulations relating to burying toxic waste. This one prohibits to bury waste that contain mercury or mercury compound, but under authorization, this act may happen. While regulations governing the provision of services for hazardous waste management lack effective implementation, and the regulation governing electronic waste management do not also explicitly provide provisions for mercury e-waste for their unique handling and management. But also the handling and disposal code of practice does not show how mercury-containing waste will be treated, taking into account the properties and behaviors of mercury in the environment. And there are no provisions in this code provided for dental amalgam waste. But also, we have the article number 11, we are still on the same article on mercury waste. The National E-Waste Management Policy for Rwanda also in their provisions for e-waste facilities, it doesn't explicitly mention mercury for its unique handling and management, while the National Environment and Climate Policy has limited progress in generating supporting regulations, guidelines, and standards covering mercury waste, and it doesn't explicitly also indicate mercury waste for their unique handling and management. The National Sanitation Policy also lacks specific industrial waste management policy regulations as well as industrial waste management guidelines, and it lacks the list of selected disposal sites for healthcare waste. The instruction determining modalities of the open air burning with an aim to solving particular problems also does not explicitly indicate mercury waste for their unique handling and management. While the medical waste management plan also doesn't specify appropriate way to treat mercury waste after collection and separation, it doesn't neither specify about dental amalgam waste and measuring equipment such as thermometers and others. So the recommendation here is to adopt a policy instrument to ensure mercury waste is managed in an environmentally sound manner, and this instrument should include standard operating procedures for sound handling and storage of mercury waste, and it should facilitate the establishment of dedicated storage facilities. But also there is a need to plan the identification of all types of mercury waste generated in Rwanda and their potential sources, and establish control measures. But also there is a need to include mercury waste in all relevant legal instruments to address the uniqueness of mercury properties by recognizing that mercury is very volatile and soluble and can travel over long distances via air and water. Regarding the article number 12 of the Convention on Contaminated Sites, in Rwanda, the Rwanda standards on potable water specification and the Rwanda standards on water quality and discharge lack adequate enforcement, and there is no registration about strategies for identifying and assessing sites contaminated by mercury or mercury compound. And also there's no guidelines on managing contaminated sites and reduce the risk posed by such sites to human health and the environment. So the recommendation here is to develop and adopt registration and strategies for identifying and assessing sites contaminated by mercury or mercury compound. Regarding financial resources, that is article number 13 of the convention. And mechanism, the law establishing FONERWA and determining its mission, organization, and functioning does not specify provisions on the protection of the environment against mercury effect, and there's a limited progress in establishing the ministerial order that shall specify the list of all activities and the projects to be financed by FONERWA. So the recommendation here is to develop a ministerial order establishing the list of activities and projects to be financed by FONERWA by taking into consideration the provisions of the Minamata Convention, but also develop a resource mobilization strategy to address mercury pollution and its impact in Rwanda. Regarding Article 14 of the Convention on Capacity Building, Technical Assistance and Technology Transfer, existing legal instruments, including the law on protection of the environment, the policy on environment and climate change, these lacks provisions on human, technical, technological capacity building on mercury issues, including environmental learning strategy and inclusion of research strategy provision covering environmentally sound alternatives. So the recommendation here is to put in place strategies, including legislative framework to foster capacity building, technical assistance, and technology transfer to comply with the provisions of this convention under this article. Regarding Article 16 of the Convention on Health Aspect, the health sector policy in its priority areas intervention do not explicitly talk about occupational exposure to mercury waste in the health sector, and the law relating to the regulation and inspection of food and pharmaceutical products also lack a ministerial order that set out instruction regulating food products and their composition, including food safety against the heavy metals such as mercury, among others. Also, the National Food and Nutrition Policy, it lacks provisions on proper food safety systems, including food safety of fish and other imported seafood, which may likely be contaminated by polluted water from their countries of origin with mercury and other heavy metals. So the recommendation here is to revise the health sector legal framework to ensure that sector takes a precautionary role in preventing, diagnosing, and treating the hazard of mercury poisoning. And also legal reforms could be aligned toward empowering the health practitioners to undertake studies on mercury levels in humans as well as food. It is also needed to set up minimum permissible limits of mercury in human diet and to further improve inspection of food for mercury contamination. It is needed to develop and implement strategies and programs to identify and protect population at risk of exposure to mercury. For instance, develop a health and gender mainstreaming strategy in national action plans. It is needed also to develop and implement science-based education and preventive programs on occupational exposure to mercury by taking into consideration the different physiological, socioeconomic implications of mercury pollution for men and women, because impacts differ when comparing men and women. Article number 18 of the Convention regarding public information and awareness and education. There is the law establishing the National Institute of Statistics of Rwanda and determining its mission and organization functioning. It needs to extend the scope of survey in data collection to include those activities that allows for effective computation of mercury inventory. The ministerial order also determining standards in education need to extend the scope of research to cover mercury issues, as very limited data and information is currently available. The ministerial order establishing curriculum in general, professional, and technical and vocational basic education also needs to extend the scope of education to cover mercury issues, as the current curriculum is very thin on mercury issues. The ministerial instructions also regulating research activities needed to extend the scope of research to cover mercury issues, as very limited data and the information is currently available. And the recommendation here is to develop strategies to promote research on mercury-related topics, and also develop strategies on promotion of mercury-related topics under chemistry and safety, health, and environmental causes, and develop a strategy to promote research on non-communicable diseases, especially those known to be caused by exposure to mercury, their causes, and preventive measures. There is also a need to raise awareness and develop a learning strategy that cover mercury issues, develop governmental coordination mechanisms to collect information about mercury from different ministries and authorities and inform the public, and also consider the establishment of pollutant release and transfer registers where applicable for the collection and dissemination of information on estimates of annual quantities of mercury and mercury compounds that are emitted, released, or disposed of throughout human activities. Regarding Article 21 of the Convention on Reporting, existing national legal instruments does not provide specific guidelines and strategies on reporting about implementation of ratified international agreements. Therefore, the recommendation is to establish strategies to build local capacity to participate in negotiations related to the convention. That was legal review regarding institutional capacity analysis. Coming back to the article number 3 of the Convention on Mercury Supply, Sources and Trade, MINICOM and its affiliated institution, LICA and LRA and Rwanda Mining Board, lack capacity to effectively control illegal import of elemental mercury and mercury-based products, and they have very limited laboratory opportunities and capacities for state analysis, expertise of unidentified chemicals or chemicals concerned, including elemental and mercury-based products. But also they have weak capacity of inspectors to detect illegal trade of elemental mercury and mercury-based products, such as pesticide and cosmetics. politics. So the recommendation here is to specify which institution shall control the mercury supply sources and trade, and we recommend LICA. It should be well placed to take this role, but there is a need of increasing their capacity and the capacity of RRA Custom Department to identify and control imports and exports of elemental mercury. Regarding the mercury-added products, Minefra, LEG, EDCL, LSB have limited capacity and means to propose and use best techniques and best environmental practices to control releases and emissions as defined in Article number 2 of the Convention. Rwanda Housing Authority has also the capacity to propose technological development, economically and technically feasible mercury-free alternatives, and they lack access, there is a lack of access on the markets to mercury-free alternatives, while Minagri lacks the capacity to control that pesticide, biocide, and topical antiseptics are mercury-free. Rwanda FDA also has limited capacity to take measures to prevent the incorporation of products listed in the convention into larger assembled products. RICA and RRA only inspect regulated and registered products under their mandate, yet non-registered product may illegally enter the consumption chain and market. RSB lack the capacity and means to reduce the use of mercury in any product listed in the convention. They lack also the capacity to prevent and reduce the use, manufacture, import, export of mercury-added products as listed in the convention, but also they lack the capacity and the right to restrict the use of mercury or mercury compounds in the processes listed in the Part 2 of Annex B of the convention. So the recommendation here is to elaborate on the list of mercury-added products imported and used through a more detailed inventory that involves measurements of mercury in the product, but also increase the capacity of RICA and the Custom Department at RRA to be able to identify and control imports and exports of mercury-added products. There is a need also to build technical and financial capacity of these stated institutions to be able to shift from the use of mercury-added products to mercury-free products where feasible, or is the penetration of our alternatives on the national market. But also there is a need to build the capacity of REMA and MINICOM to control manufacturing processes in which mercury could be added. Regarding the article number 7 on ACGM, Rwanda Mining Board and the Federation of Mining Cooperatives need intensification of efforts to promote continued use of mercury-free mining and processing activities in ACGM, and also support the development and research of mercury-free mining and mineral processing alternatives. So the recommendation here is to improve the capacity in ACGM sector and strengthen the prohibition and absence of mercury use in this sector through development of National Action Plan for ACGM and gender mainstreaming strategy into the National Action Plan. Regarding the article number 8 of the Convention on Emissions, the Ministry of Environment and LEMA have limited capacity to identify sources of mercury and quantify mercury, and also to control the emissions of mercury and mercury compound to the atmosphere. They have also no capacity and means to propose alternative measures to reduce emissions of mercury to the atmosphere and to control and, where feasible, reduce the release of mercury and mercury compound to the atmosphere. But also they do not have the capacity to propose and use best techniques and best environmental practices to control emissions to the atmosphere from relevant sources. RURA has limited capacity to collect information on mercury and to regulate utilities. While Enviroserve and Depo Kalsimbi, these are two companies involved in collecting waste. So from Enviroserve Rwanda, while selecting the mercury-containing e-waste, they only use information based on literature and labeling, and they may fail to detect other sources. But they do not also incinerate mercury-containing waste, as they do not have best available techniques and best environmental practices to control emissions from incineration. While Depo Kalsimbi do not have also adequate capacity to identify sources of mercury and quantify it, they also do not have best available techniques and best environmental practices to control emissions from incineration of mercury-containing waste. So the recommendation here is for these institutions to be aware of mercury emissions point sources as defined by the convention and take the lead in regulating activities that emit mercury. But also there is a need to strengthen human, technical and financial capacity of Ministry of Environment and the LULA to achieve the above recommended action and strengthen the capacity of environmental inspectors to be able to control mercury emissions from relevant sources and strengthen the capacity of agencies and companies whose activities are potential sources of mercury emissions to be able to comply with this article number 8 of the convention. Regarding article number 9 of the convention on releases, Minister of Environment and LEMA needed to establish release limit values to control and where feasible reduce releases from relevant sources and coordinate and collaborate in research on best available techniques and best environmental practices to control the releases from relevant sources. But also, these institutions need to apply a multi-important control strategy that would deliver co-benefits for the control of mercury releases. And there is a need to establish alternative measures to reduce releases from relevant sources. So, also, these institutions need to be aware of mercury releases point sources as defined by the convention and take the lead in regulating activities that are releasing mercury. But also there is a need to strengthen the capacity of environmental inspectors to be able to control mercury releases and strengthen the capacity of agencies and companies whose activities are potential sources of mercury releases. Regarding the article number 10 of the Convention on Environmental Sound Interim Storage of Mercury other than waste, the Ministry of Environment and LEMA lack mechanisms for regulation of interim storage of mercury and mercury compounds other than mercury waste. While MINICOM lacks the list of industries that use mercury or mercury compound for allowed purposes within the convention and the inventory of the stock of mercury for the use for allowed purposes from all sectors and records. Rwanda Medical Supplies, RMS, lacks capacity to provide standard operating procedures for managing mercury-containing waste and to coordinate collection and storage of mercury-containing equipment being phased out. So the recommendation here is to identify industries potentially using mercury for allowed purposes within the convention and make an inventory of the stock of mercury for use for allowed purposes as mentioned in the convention from all sectors and keep records. But also there is a need to enhance the regulatory and technical capacity for building and managing environmental sound interim storage facilities of mercury and mercury compound. Regarding Article 11 of the Convention on mercury waste, still Ministry of Environment and LEMA lack the capacity to control and manage products or material waste that are likely to contain mercury, and LULA has limited capacity to collect information on mercury waste, while EnviroServ, the same information is provided here. They only use information from literature and labeling and may fail to detect other sources, but also they do not incinerate their waste containing mercury because they lack capacities to control emissions from the incineration. The POCA SIMB also lack adequate capacity to identify sources of mercury and quantify mercury waste, and they don't have best available techniques and best environmental practices to manage mercury waste as the incineration is not an appropriate method. So the recommendation here is to put in place a laboratory designed to test the presence of mercury and other hazardous substances in generated waste, but also upgrade the existing hazardous waste elimination facilities to allow treatment of mercury waste and apply technical guidelines on the environmental sound management of mercury waste. Regarding Article number 12 of the Convention on Contaminated Sites, LEMA lacks technical capacity to identify sites contaminated with mercury sources and quantify mercury, and it lacks guidelines on how to dispose mercury-containing waste. It lacks also the capacity to control and manage mercury-containing waste to identify the effect and impact of mercury on biological and the physical environment. And it lacks also the capacity and the means to protect the biological and the the physical environment against mercury effect and impact. So the recommendation here is to develop guidelines for identification, characterization, and remediation of mercury-contaminated sites, but also build technological capacity to characterize mercury-contaminated sites, in particular laboratory capacities, and strengthen operational capacities, including infrastructure for correction, treatment, storage, and disposal of hazardous waste soils, particularly for mercury-contaminated soil. Regarding the Article 13 of the Convention on Financial Resources and Mechanism, for Rwanda, LEMA also lack a focus on mercury-related issues as specified in the Convention. So the recommendation here is to strengthen LEMA and FONERWA to prepare grant proposals as a way of mobilizing financial resources to support adoption of technologies that support the subsequent reduction in the use of mercury or the complete substitution of mercury processes and mercury-containing product. But also, REMA should form partnerships with local NGOs in developing fundable small grant programs that can be also funded under the JEF UNDP CGP program. REMA should also be capacitated to develop eco-labeling frameworks that will differentiate products that were produced with mercury from those without mercury use. Regarding the capacity building, technical assistance, and technology transfer stated in Article 14 of the Convention, the Ministry of Environment lacks specific strategies to build partnerships oriented to the implementation of this convention, and the recommendation is to establish focal points for international cooperation with other countries or international organizations to improve the capacity to reduce and, where feasible, eliminate the use of mercury in Rwanda. Regarding Article number 16 of the Convention on Health Aspect, Ministry of Health needs strategy to promote prevention, treatment, and care services for mercury-affected populations. And it lacks strategies and programs to identify and protect populations at risk of exposure to mercury, especially in dental amalgam, in cleaning services, in manufacturing industries, etc. Ministry of Health also lacks science-based education and preventive programs on occupational exposure at workplace by taking into consideration the different physiological, socioeconomic implications of this mercury pollution for men and women. But there is also a need to improve the capacity of relevant staff to prevent, treat, and provide care services for mercury-affected populations, and there is lack of equipment to prevent, treat, and provide care services for mercury-affected population. While the International Labour Organization also, it doesn't have specific data on mercury exposure in Rwanda due to the high level of informality. MIFOTRA lacks the capacity to identify the sources of mercury and contamination pathways. They lack the ability to link the workers' diseases to mercury pollution and toxicity, and they lack knowledge about the different physiological, socioeconomic implications of the mercury pollution for men and women. So the recommendation here is to promote appropriate health care services for prevention, treatment, and care for people likely exposed to mercury, and consider the different physiological, socioeconomic implications of mercury pollution for men and women. But also there is a need to strengthen institutional, technical, and health professional capacities for prevention, diagnosis, treatment, and monitoring relevant to Rwanda, given known health impact within communities likely exposed to mercury. There is also a need to build the capacity of healthcare personnel to diagnose and treat diseases related to mercury poisoning and implement science-based educational and preventive programs on occupational exposure to mercury. But also there's a need to identify mercury effect on workers' health likely exposed to mercury releases and emissions for further prevention and protection intervention, and consider different physiological and socioeconomic implications of this mercury pollution for men and women. Regarding public information, awareness, and education, stated in Article 18 of the Convention, MINEDIC has insufficient awareness on mercury and its effect and impact on and limited capacity to correct information on mercury Makari and package it into the education curriculum, while Remarac's Makari learning strategy, URA and its centers of excellences also have limited research and publication on Makari, and they do not have so far the capacity and means to promote research into sustainable non-Makari alternatives. NIRDA does not conduct at all and support research on Makari-related topics. So the recommendation here is to raise awareness on mercury and other heavy metals and develop revised curriculums that encompass basic understanding of properties, sources, and effects of mercury, management, disposal of mercury containing waste, and also remediation of mercury contaminated sites within the chemistry subject, and also environmental courses in secondary schools, Rwanda polytechnics, and universities. But there is also a need to develop and implement awareness and educational programs on mercury and its risk. There's also a need to promote research on mercury and its impact on human health, on biological diversity, and on the physical environment, and also disseminate the result. There's also a need to promote and conduct research on mercury-related topics and disseminate the result, and also conduct education, training, and public awareness related to the effect of exposure to mercury and mercury compound. Regarding Article 21 of the Convention on Reporting, REMA lacks technical and financial means to conduct research and report research-based information on mercury. Therefore, there is a need to build the capacity of REMA to be able to report research-based information on mercury. I thank you for your kind attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the presentation, very meaningful and full of the information. So now we are turning back to the Jacob. Jacob, the floor is yours. Remove your screen, please. Okay.
May Guillaume present first? Now it's coming. Okay. Guillaume, I'm quick. Shall we take mine quickly and you come after me?
This is my presentation on the screen, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm
Great.
Sure, actually.
Yeah, sorry. Great, Guillaume.
Yeah, no
Sorry.
problem. Can everybody see the screen? Because I don't see it very well on my side, but that's not so much an issue. That you can see. So I will. The contribution to the implementation of the convention and a bit of a global outlook on the number of MIAs that were submitted and what were the main conclusions. And then in the second part, I will more focus on the MIA in Rwanda, what was the project and report structure, the project methodology, and the time frame for the project. Next slide, please. 2 slides, actually. You can move 2 slides ahead. believe if you use the arrow left and right, you will go faster. Yes. So can you move one slide back, please? We went a bit too far. Yes, perfect. One next, one after. Yes, perfect. So if we look at the rationale for the MIA, it finds its origin in the period when the Minamata Convention was still actually being implemented. If we look, for example, at the resolution on arrangements in the interim period before the entry into force of the convention, this resolution was adopted in 2013 at the Conference of Plenipotentiaries, together with the Minamata Convention. This resolution already requested the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee on Mercury to support those activities required or encouraged by the Convention that will facilitate the rapid entry into force of the Convention and its implementation, and in particular guidance on the identification of sources of release and the methodology for preparing inventories as required by Article 9. So we can already see that the rationale for the Minamata initial assessment was already enshrined in the negotiation process before even the convention was adopted. Then if we look at Article 13 of the convention, it's this article that provides the financial mechanism to support the MIAs and other activities implemented under the convention in developing countries and in parties with economies in transition. Next slide, please. So the objective and the outcomes of the MIAs. So first, the MIA is undertaken to enable governments to determine the national requirements and needs for the ratification of the convention. If the convention was not already ratified, which was not the case for Rwanda, which had already ratified the convention before starting the MIA. In this case, the activities included are, for example, making sure that the operational national decision-making mechanism to assume the obligation under the convention is in place. It's also identifying benefits from ratification, analyzing financial obligation, and raising awareness on the environmental and health impact of mercury. The second goal, and the most important goal of the MIA process, is to establish a national foundation to undertake future work towards the implementation of the convention. I will not enter in details here because that is what I will be presenting in the next slide on the contribution of the MIA process to the implementation of the convention. In general, the overall outcome of the MIA includes a national mercury profile, including significant sources of emission and release, as well as inventories of mercury and mercury compound. It also includes an overview of structures, institutions, legislation already available to implement the convention, as well as a summary of barriers that will hinder or prevent the implementation of the convention. It actually even goes a bit deeper than this by proposing priorities for actions as invited by Article 20, and that's also what Rwanda has been doing in its MIA. Next slide, please. So when we come to the contribution of the MIA to the implementation of the convention, for those of you who are familiar with the project, you will notice that the MIA is contributing directly to fulfilling several obligations under the convention. I could as well have called this slide rationale again as the previous slide, as these obligations are somehow the raison d'etre of the MIA. For example, the MIA helps fulfilling the obligation under Article 3 on mercury supply sources to identify individual stocks of mercury or mercury compounds. It also helps fulfilling the obligation of Article 8 on emissions to establish as soon as practicable an inventory of emissions, as well as the obligation under Article 9 on release to identify point sources of mercury release and to establish as soon as practicable an inventory. It also helps fulfilling the obligation of Article 12 on contaminated sites to develop appropriate strategies for identifying and assessing sites contaminated by mercury or mercury compound. In this regard, the MIA in Rwanda went even a bit further in carrying out already a preliminary identification of contaminated sites. It also helps fulfilling the obligation under Article 20 on implementation plan to develop an implementation plan for the convention. This is something that will be presented later on today. It also finally helps fulfilling the obligation of Article 21 on reporting to report to the Conference of Parties on measures it has taken to implement the provision of the convention. Next slide, please. So the MIA process also contributes indirectly, so to say, to the implementation of other provision of the convention, or it paves the way to the implementation of those obligations. So you're now seeing on the screen the main obligations contained in the first operational paragraph of the convention. My goal here is not to present them in detail, but I will just anticipate a bit the next presentation by showing you how a few results of the MIA in Rwanda will contribute to the implementation of the convention. If we look, for example, at Article 3, there is an obligation to ban new primary mercury mining. So the legal assessment that was carried out during the MIA, as we heard it before, revealed that the country did not yet have the legislation necessary to fulfill this obligation, in the sense that mercury mining is not yet banned in Rwanda. Similarly, if we look now at Articles 4, 5, and 6, observations and field visits made during the MIA confirm that the country does not use mercury compounds in manufacturing processes. The use of the mercury in these manufacturing processes is banned as per Article 5 and the Annex B of the Convention since 2020. Finally, the institutional assessment also showed that the country did not have the capacity yet to control emissions of mercury as required under Article 8 of the Convention. Next slide, please. Again, still showing you some of the contributions of the MIA. If we look at Article 11 on mercury waste, the assessments carried out during the MIA reveal that the country does not yet have environmentally sound mercury waste management facilities as required by this article. If we look at Article 12, to finish with, the MIA conducted a preliminary assessment of mercury contaminated sites, making them progress towards the implementation of the obligations under this article. So you see that the Minamata initial assessment that was carried out in Rwanda has been contributing to the implementation by Rwanda of several articles of the Minamata Convention. Next slide, please. So now if we look a bit at a global outlook, a very brief outlook of the MIAs, what we can see is that as of June 2023, there are already 141 parties to the convention, and out of those parties, 70 countries have already, or rather 70 MIAs were submitted, representing 84 countries. They were submitted to the Secretary of the Convention. There is also one national inventory that was submitted by a country that is not a party to the Convention, it's actually Russia, but that was still interested in following this process. If we look now at the main national priorities that were described in the first 39 MIA reports submitted, we realize that the most important articles for countries are Article 4 on phasing out mercury-added products, Article 11 on waste management, Article 7 on ASGM, Article 8 and 9 on emissions and release, and Article 19 on monitoring. So this comes without too much surprise, since they touch upon issues which are common to most countries of the Global South, such as import, export, control of informal mining and informal activities, control of emissions and release, and those are articles that require significant institutional, technical, and financial capacities. Next slide, please. So that was what I wanted to present a bit on a global perspective, or the background of the MIA. Now I will more focus on the implementation of the MIA in Rwanda. So the Minamata initial assessment process have the same goal and structure as I said before in all countries, but sometimes the project structure differs a bit. Here you have in front of you the project structure that has been used by Rwanda. For those unfamiliar with our jargon, so projects are divided into components, outcomes, and outputs. As an enabling activity, the MIA in Rwanda had only one component and one outcome, which is the development of the MIA report, so we can focus only on the output level here. So there were 4 outputs for this project, the first one being project coordination mechanism established and institutional gap identified. So these outputs included like 4 activities, which are not on the screen, but those activities range from conduct a national project coordination meeting to establishing the NSC and organizing, for example, capacity development workshops and training. The output 2 focused on the review of existing mercury-related regulations and the identification of needed policy reform to prepare for the implementation of the convention. Similarly, there were 3 activities under this output that were executed in this project. These 3 activities are to evaluate existing structures, policy strategies, laws, and regulation, as well as sensitizing policymakers regarding policy gaps, and finally to prepare a list of needed mercury-related regulations while considering the vulnerabilities of different groups. The third output is the national mercury profile, the national inventory, which included 5 activities, the mercury inventory training, the collection of data for the inventory, the draft of the initial inventory report, the identification of key sectors for intervention, as well as the development of intervention plans. And finally, the fourth output is the dissemination of information among relevant stakeholders groups, with, in this case, only two activities, the development of communication materials and the organization and conduction of awareness-raising training campaign. Next slide, please. So the structure of the MIA report is to some extent similar to the one of the MIA project, with the main parts being the inventory as chapter 2, the assessment as chapter 3, the identification of population at risk as chapter 4, and the implementation plan as chapter 6. So it's not worth spending so much more time on this, so we can move to the next slide. So now if we look at the overall project methodology, and in particular the institutional arrangements that were in place for this project, so Jeff was the founding source. UNIDO acted as the Jeff implementing agency for the projects. UNIDO provided throughout the project implementation oversight. REMA was the main governmental stakeholder providing national leadership. The project team was established by REMA and executed the project in the country. REMA also acted as the chair and secretariat of the National Steering Group, which was established as an interministerial steering group comprised of relevant ministries, associations, and stakeholders from the civil society to provide overall guidance, strategic inputs, and coordination for the execution of activity. And finally, UNITAR, which I represent today, acted as the co-executing agency, providing technical expertise for development of all MIA, Minamata INHS assessment-related activities. If we look now in more detail at the methodology, so this project has made use of a number of guidance aiming at ensuring a standardized structure and consistency of results across all MIA projects carried out in the world. So in terms of guidance, we have the guidance document developed by the UNDP early at the beginning of the entry to force, or even at the beginning of the period where the convention was open for signature, but which was revised in 2020. The guidance document, Minamata Initial Assessment Report, suggested structure and contents. Another guidance that was used during the project is the toolkit for identification and quantification of mercury release, inventory level 1 and level 2. This toolkit was used in 90 MIA projects throughout the world, and it's the 2.1 version that was used, the 2019 version that was used for the MIA in Rwanda, but Brian will present it into more details after. Another guidance that was used is the one for identifying population at risk for mercury, which was developed jointly by WHO and UNEP in 2008. And finally, UNITAR has also been providing guidance and terms of reference for the various activities of the project, as well as providing ongoing support to the country contacts. The project could also benefit from some training activities that were available to project participants. For example, UNITAR delivered to Jacob, in the person of Jacob, delivered the training on the use of the UNEP toolkit for mercury inventory. This training was conducted in March 2022, and also project participants had the opportunity to participate in the online Mercury Learn course that is being made available by UNITAR. Next slide, please. In terms of data collection, the project will count on an experienced team of national consultants which carried out the whole data collection process on the field, including 67 field visits and 63 key informant interviews in the 5 provinces of Rwanda. So this included visits to hospitals, pharmacies, gold mining sites, incinerators, cement plants, power plants, chemical industries, recycling industries, etc. The data collection also was supported by national, regional, and international information sources, such as, for example, the UN Comtrade database, the US Geological Survey, FAO's report, and the International Energy Agency database, among others. Finally, the UNEP toolkit is also by design, a good way to get information on data, because since the toolkit is pre-populated with default input factors and output distribution factors, of which most were used, which is the data collection workload. So again, Brian and Jacob will say more about this toolkit. When it comes to the data analysis and review, the project will count again on the team of national consultants, as well on the UNITAR senior inventory expert, Jacob, available for technical backstopping throughout the MIA process. There was also 2 rounds of UNITAR technical review, which were carried out during the summer last year. And as the next slide, please, next and last slide, I will not get into detail on this, but just as a small reminder of the project time frame, maybe the most important is the approval of the project in April 2019, the inception workshop in February 2022, the training on the use of the toolkit in March 2022, and then the field visits which were carried out during the spring of 2022, and the development of the MIA report in itself during the summer last year. And today, the dissemination workshop. So that was all on my side on this general presentation. Don't hesitate if you have any questions. I'm available to answer them. Thank you very much. We do not hear feedback from the room.
So we'll be having a round of questions before the end of this of our dissemination workshop. So Jacob, I think this is your presentation now. Maybe you are muted. Okay.
Okay, we missed the opening slide. That's not a problem. But if you'll allow me to just very briefly put together some framework for what we're hearing today. Yeah, up. Yes. No. One back, please, to number 1 at the top. I will tell you a little bit, very quickly, about why we're worried about mercury. If any of you took part in the training that I did earlier, you will have heard this. So please bear with me. But this is just very short to make sure that we are all in the same playing field. So next slide, please. Yeah. So we know that mercury is very practical. That's why it's been used so widely earlier. But it's very toxic, and that's why we have to do something about it. Our human activity actually doubled the mercury amounts in the biosphere. That's where we live, in the part of the world where we live. And we have seen problematic exposure all around the world. So something needs to be done, and hence the Minamata Convention, which now means that mercury is being phased out, the intentional uses, and we're also reducing. We're trying to reduce the other sources. Next slide, please. Yeah. Mercury is not only toxic, it's also persistent. And this means that it never leaves our biosphere once it goes there, unless we can manage it in the beginning and prevent it from even getting into the biosphere, but otherwise it's very difficult to do anything about it. This is what we're aiming at now. This is our focus, to regulate or bring down the roughly 1/3 of the current circulation of mercury in the atmosphere by making reduction efforts. The other third is from previous human activity. And so you see, this one we also want to gradually bring down by doing something to avoid spreading mercury in the environment now. The last third is from natural emissions, and these are volcanoes and washing out rocks and so on. And because mercury is a natural element, but as I said, we have doubled the exposure to mercury in the world, so we need to bring our part down. Next slide, please. As I said, mercury is toxic, but it is so in all its forms, and it is so at very low concentrations. Probably there's no lower threshold, and the subtlest effect are damages to our unborn babies, to the brain and nerve systems. There are loads of effects also on grown-up humans. They can also suffer brain damage and nerve damage, but it has most permanent and damaging effects and at lowest concentration on our unborn babies. And it not, see, that's the mercury comes in with the mothers, so we have to spend years avoiding that the mercury is even entering the systems of the mothers. Mercury can also change form in nature, which makes it harder to manage. We know of the metal mercury, which is fluid at room temperature, but there's always gas, mercury gas beyond it. It's invisible, but it's there. And that makes it more tricky to grasp. We have organic mercury compounds, so mercury combined with carbon and so on. And these are more readily accumulated in our body, hence they create more problems. There are also inorganic mercury compounds, and all these three types we have to manage and be careful about in our best available techniques and best environmental practices work. Next slide, please. Furthermore, when we get mercury in the environment, it accumulates in living organisms, and even worse, it does what we call biomagnification. So up the food web, from the small algae to the small fish to the big fish and so on, all the mercury is all the way concentrated, meaning that when it comes to us, when we eat a big fish, the mercury concentrations are problematic, at least in some cases. Of course, local direct exposure, if we live next to an industrial facility that emits mercury, it can have very severe effects, or if there's informal mining using mercury and things like that. And as we heard from our colleague before, mercury spreads with the atmosphere, but also with rivers and ocean currents. But in the atmosphere, it's very fast, so it's days and weeks. And this means that it's a shared problem. We in Rwanda, you'll get the mercury from your neighboring states, and your mercury will be spread to your other neighbors. So we need to work on this together. Next slide, please. Just to be very clear, we have some industrial extraction and processing of raw materials that have mercury in the materials already. This is not something we put there. So, for example, in large-scale gold mining, we don't use mercury because we use cyanide instead in the big facilities. But the mercury has to be managed anyway. So that is why these non-ferrous metal production facilities can have enormous outputs of mercury, much to land, but also to air and so on, depending on the technology used, the so-called BAT and BEP, best available techniques and best environmental practices used. Then we have production processes where we add mercury intentionally. I think it's established that you don't have any. We have then also mercury added products, so-called, meaning that we put mercury in there for a specific technical effects, like you probably know a thermometer with mercury inside, a fever thermometer. So this is just one example. It could also be the lamps, fluorescent lights, and so on. Next slide, please. I think Guillaume has answered this. We need mercury inventories to be able to set our focus. Where can we pick the low-hanging fruit? Where can we do most for the least money to reduce the exposure? But the inventories also helps identify key sectors and communicate with these, as the inventory team has already done through the interviews and so on. And it helps identifying vulnerable environments and populations at risk, mainly as through the overview of where does mercury come into society from our use or from our releases. And then finally, we can use the inventory to measure our progress in reduction efforts. This is something that you'll also need to do because the Minamata Convention says that for every 5 years you have to update your inventory. Next slide, please. As Guillaume mentioned, there is this UNEP Mercury Inventory Toolkit, just called the toolkit in short. It was made to make it much easier for countries to make their own national inventories. It is a standardized process approach. It gives a lot of data. And it also calculates, when you add the needed data, it calculates the emissions to air, releases to water and land, and flows to different waste fractions and byproducts in one go at the same time, so that's very practical. I'd like to mention that it works with what we call source categories. So these are the overall groups. It is, for instance, primary metal production, the production and use of consumer products, mercury-added products, as I mentioned. But it also works with specific subcategories, as we call them, which is the individual types of mercury releases and emissions. For example, industrial gold mining, mercury thermometers, lamps containing mercury, etc. These are subcategories. So the toolkit gives a lot of guidance on how to make inventories, but it also describes the different mercury sources. So for any policymakers, NGOs, etc., look at the toolkit reference reports catalog of mercury sources, and just in a few pages you'll get an idea what is this kind of mercury source. For instance, industrial gold mining. What are the possibilities for reducing emissions? That's also mentioned there. So it's a big catalog that it could be used much more. Have a look at it. You just Google UNEP Mercury Inventory Toolkit and it'll come up and you can see. Next slide, please. The toolkit uses an important principle that I'd just like to mention briefly. Because mercury is an element, it's persistent, as I said, so it's not destroyed, it's not created in any processes that we are interested in, yes, and it's only fit into a system and coming out of a system. So total inputs, all that comes in must come out in some way. What we do in the toolkit is to, point one, establish how much comes in, and point two, establish where does it come out and in what quantities, because that's important to when we want to make reductions. We need to know where to target our efforts. Next slide, please. As Guillaume said, the toolkit has what we call default calculation factors. The toolkit is always, the estimates of mercury inputs and releases and emissions are always based on national or local activity rate data. So that could be how much gold ore is used, how many thermometers are used in the society, and so on. These kind of numbers are national. But to calculate the mercury inputs and outputs, you need to use so-called input factors, for example, grams of mercury per thermometer or concentration of mercury in gold ore. And the best is to measure that in your own country, because for some things it differs. For example, for gold mining, the mercury concentration in the gold ore would differ depending on the local geology. But because many countries have not had the capacity or means to make their own measurements, and actually it's the most of the countries using the toolkit for the MIAs, for Minamata initial assessments, they use the default factors because that was an easy approach to getting some estimates rather than no estimates. And for Rwanda, as Jom said, most of the calculations are based on these, let's say, standard factors, meaning that they are the same between countries, except for the, as I recall, for the industrial gold mining, where a factor from South Africa was used. And this may be quite reasonable because you're in the same part of the world and the geology may be similar. We don't know exactly, because as long as we have not measured, we don't know the exact mercury input, or rather close to the exact. But we have an idea that we can work on. Next slide, please. So just to show you, the toolkit is a number of documents, so telling you how to do, but also giving you a lot of background data that you need for this work. It also have reporting formats and all kind of stuff. And then it has calculation spreadsheets, which are the actual tools where we quantify the mercury releases or estimates of mercury releases and emissions. And so this is what Brian and his colleagues, who will now present the results of the Rwanda mercury inventory, they have used these spreadsheets where they have put the activity rate data, so how much gold ore, for example, or how many thermometers, and then used these input and output factors that I talked about before to get estimates of the mercury flows through society. So next slide, and thank you. This was all from me, and I will hand over to Brian or his colleague, Prof. Mapanda, and to tell you about the specifics from the Rwanda mercury inventory. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We'll just call Brian Gather if he is ready for the presentation before Mapanda comes in.
I can hear you, but Patrick, do you hear?
Yeah.
Great.
Patrick, I just want to check if colleagues who are not with us online can hear us.
Online, we can hear you.
Thank you, Jacob, for laying the foundation for the presentation. That was very good, and I believe it will be very helpful for our colleagues to follow the presentation. Let me just wait for Patrick to confirm that you can hear us so that I can continue with the presentation.
Yes, we can see the slide.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So on behalf of Irona Consultancy Private Limited, together with a group of consultants that I've been working with, my name is Brian Gada. I was the mercury inventory specialist for the Rwanda Mercury Initial Assessment project, which was carried out in Rwanda. We worked together closely with Rwanda and then the Rwanda Environment Management Authority, together with partners from UNITO, as we're implementing the project. Because of time, I will rush through certain slides and presentations that have already been covered. By way of presentation outline, I will focus mainly on three main areas, which is the basic introduction. I will skip much of the slides on that. And the major focus will be on mercury inventory and identification of sources. And then there will be a section on discussion and recommendations. By way of introduction, this is just showing the distribution of mercury emissions at a global scale, and you will notice that there is significant emissions that have also been noted in Africa, particularly when you look at the Southern African region, where gold mining is mainly the main activity that is contributing to that. When you then also focus on Central, East and West Africa, there is also some level of emissions that is also coming to that. will draw much of our attention to Rwanda. And I will skip the rationale of the study because this has also been covered. But the whole idea was to identify and quantify the amount of mercury releases in Rwanda. The purpose of the study was to gather baseline results on mercury stocks, supplies, mercury emissions and releases in Rwanda, and to asking ourselves questions to say, okay, so does Rwanda have any cleaner production technologies, alternatives to mercury that are currently being used? What is the situation in Rwanda? We also yet to look at the legal framework, including the institutional capacity, which has already been presented in terms of the management of mercury. So when we now look at the toolkit that we used, which has already been highlighted by Jacob, we try to focus on the 10 source categories which are presented there. As I continue with the presentation, you will see the most relevant, the most specific categories that are of key importance to Rwanda that needs to be regulated and to be followed through closely because they are the major contributors of negative releases and emissions in Rwanda. So we have extraction and use of fuels, primary metal production, production of other metals, intentional use of mercury, consumer products, other intentional uses, recycling of metals, waste incineration and burning, waste disposal, and then crematoria and cemeteries. The approach to the inventory, again, it has been highlighted by Jacob explicitly, and I thank him for his presentation. But the mercury inventory toolkit was used in the preparation of the Rwanda NIA report, and it uses a mass balance approach where we are saying estimated mercury releases to pathway X is given by the activity rate multiplied by as a factor of the input factor and the output distribution factor. So this is just to sum up the equation that was used in the toolkit where we're inputting values. It is using a mass balance approach. In terms of the study area, we covered the whole of Rwanda, and the spatial distribution of the sites is also indicated. We looked at healthcare facilities, pharmacies, clinics, incinerators, gold mines, all the various industrial sectors that are involved in different production lines, which serve as contributors to the release and emissions of mercury into the environment. So out of the 53 categories that are present in terms of the toolkit, we found that 33 out of the 53 were actually potential sources of mercury releases in Rwanda. So extraction and use of fuels, energy sources, yes, it was noted to be present in Rwanda. Primary metal production, yes, it was also found to be in a source category present in Rwanda. Production of other minerals and materials with mercury impurities, yes, it was identified. Intentional use of mercury in industrial processes, no, it was not present in Rwanda according to our findings during the study. Consumer products with intentional use of mercury, yes. And then other intentional products and processes in which mercury is used, yes. Production of recycled mercury, secondary mercury production, yes. Waste incineration, definitely. Waste disposal and landfill wastewater treatment, yes. And then crematoria and cemeteries, yes. So by way of overview, we found out that about 19,558.85 kilograms of mercury per year could be released in Rwanda using the baseline, the base year of 2018, of which 2,396.58 kgs are emitted to air, 544.01 kgs are emitted to water, 13,480.66 kgs are released to land, 600.41 kgs are partitioned to byproducts and impurities, 2,415 kgs are released to general waste, and 122.19 kilograms went into sector-specific treatment and disposal. As an overview, if you can reflect and recall from my presentation, when I talked about the 10 source categories. So this is the slide which I was saying. Now we will see which areas that Rwanda really needs to focus on. So particularly now when you look at primary metal production, which was ranked the highest with 74.95% of the estimated releases of mercury in Rwanda. And you also notice consumer products with intentional use of mercury, which had 12.22%. And we also have waste incineration and burning also as a significant category. So of the 10 categories, we can say 3 categories were identified to be major significant source categories that really need action to be taken. However, noting the intrinsic properties of mercury, we cannot also ignore the other categories where mercury was also released, where we have 2.74%, 1.81%, 0.27%, and 0.43%. Noting that once mercury is released in the environment, it cannot be destroyed, but it is rather converted from one form to another. It is moving from one environment to another environment, from one trophic level to another trophic level. So that nature of mercury itself requires us to take a holistic approach when we're now moving towards the control and the management of mercury at a national level. When we look at a summary of releases by pathway in Rwanda, we see most of the mercury is being released to land, where we have 13,480.66 kgs per year being released to land, and we have 2,415 kgs being released to general waste, and we also have about 2,396.58 being released to air. Making releases to air, which sectors, which source categories are contributing significantly to the release to air? We notice waste incineration and burning, which is contributing 1,477.2 kgs per year, and primary metal production, which is contributing 586.4 kilograms per year. So these are the major sectors where mercury is being released into air. And if we analyze the release to air, we will notice that when we look at waste incineration and burning, there are several number of factors that come into play when we look at the waste management sector, where we are looking in and we see the waste segregation, point source separation of waste is not effectively implemented in Rwanda. It's not being done at a very large scale. So at the end of the day, you find waste containing mercury is finding its way to the incineration facilities. That is the first point. And then the second point now is the incineration facilities do not have adequate air pollution control devices to then control the management of the release of mercury containing emissions into the environment. So what I'm trying to point out here is a systematic approach to the analysis of these source categories that was carried out under the NIA in a bid to come up with recommendations that would then assist Rwanda in addressing its mercury issues and mercury problems. Same applies when you look at primary metal production. You notice largely it will be as a result of the extraction process of mercury, wherein mercury that is geogenically available in the ore is then released. And also this needs to be confirmed with the National Action Plan for Artisanal Small-Scale Gold Mining Sector. But during the MIA, we had indications to say there might be open burning of the mercury gold amalgam in the small-scale mining sector, which is common in any other African country where ASGM is prevalent. So with the NAP that was being carried out in Rwanda, you will notice these two reports, they speak to each other. So we believe Rwanda by now, they now have finer information in terms of that, and that will inform the actions that will then be taken by the country in terms of addressing that. Again, when you look at the releases to water, the major source category is waste management, and followed by primary metal production as another source category. Again, we are looking at the issue to say the absence of adequate wastewater treatment facilities results then in the release of mercury into the environment. And I will emphasize the point that when it comes to the waste management sector, once we are not segregating our waste at the point source, you will find waste containing mercury will eventually result in the release of mercury during the slow degradation of those waste. Absence of adequately properly engineered landfill facilities also contributes significantly to the release of mercury into the various release pathways, especially water and land. We notice now when it comes to release of mercury into land in Rwanda, it was predominantly as a result of primary metal production, particularly from the gold sector. We tried to use a regional input factor to try and closely estimate the mercury releases in Rwanda, but we still got this figure of 13,193.4 kgs of mercury as a result of that. And the recommendation to this that came with it is then there might be a need to carefully study within at national level to see the input factor that is specific to Rwanda, and this figure can actually reduce and you have a country specific emissions and releases to land, emissions to air and releases to air regarding that. I move on now to a summary of mercury outputs and byproducts, where you notice also it was predominantly as a result of primary metal production. All the other source categories, it was relatively negligible. When you look at general waste, you find now consumer products are now the major contributor in terms of the release and emissions of mercury, wherein 2.175 kgs are being released per year. When you look at this, it simply shows the mercury that is contained in products that are consumed in Rwanda is finding its way into the environment. We move on to the next slide, where we look at specific waste treatment and disposal facilities. So we have other products and processes being leading in this category with 113 kgs per year. But relatively, when you look at the other categories, the releases to specific waste and treatment and disposal are relatively less compared to other sources. So by way of discussing these findings, you find we have concluded, we have now the first report in terms of what is the mercury situation in Rwanda, what are the major problem areas in Rwanda, which I have mentioned, say in the primary metal production, which I have indicated to say consumer products with the intention use of mercury. There is need now to refine the inventory through establishment of country-specific input factors. In particular, when we look at the gold mining sector, we know and we believe, based on our experience in the African region, that if a country in a specific input factor is found, that figures that we got for the gold mining sector can significantly be reduced. Assessment of the cost of implementing best available technologies and techniques, which is sector specific, and the benefits thereof, including the cost of technology transfer. This is very critical as Rwanda will now be mapping their way in terms of containing products. Various sectors, e.g., health, pharmaceuticals, etc. Continuous monitoring of dental services is required to ensure the smooth phasing out of mercury containing dental amalgam. And then undertaking epidemiological studies to support human exposure assessments so that the mercury problem, the mercury situation in Rwanda is clearly understood. And then a detailed assessment of the environmental human exposure to mercury locally near key sources. We are looking at communities who are residing close, let's say, to power plants, communities who are residing, let's say, close to incineration facilities, to waste disposal facilities. These are some of the studies that can be taken by REMA through its various partners to really understand the situation, and then Rwanda will then have informed policies and informed legal instruments based on scientific data. Looking also at vulnerable populations, accessing exposure pathways for different sources to determine exposure concentrations. With that, I move on to the next slide. Assessment of the suitability of Rwanda waste and disposal facilities for safe handling of different types of mercury-containing waste. For example, we look at waste of mercury, which is high concentrations, which is considered as hazardous waste. What are the disposal methods that are available and how are they applicable in Rwanda? Waste containing mercury, high concentrations considered as hazardous waste. Waste contaminated with mercury, low concentrations, possibly hazardous waste. So we are looking at the different categories of mercury containing waste in terms of the Minamata Convention as read together with the Basel Convention, and assessing the suitability of Rwanda's facilities to handle these different types of waste, if possible. I move on to assessment of environmental practices that are conducted by e-waste recycling facilities and other recyclers to avoid mercury contamination and formulation of best practices and guidelines. Noting that e-waste contains mercury, there is a need to really understand how the companies which are dealing with e-waste, how are they doing their business, what procedures and protocols are they using, so that this can inform the regulations that can be put in place. As an industry themselves, companies can also then standardize their processes and come up with standard operating procedures that reduce and minimize the release of mercury. And I believe lastly, the development of a coordinated system of collecting environmental baseline information on mercury and other parameters. And this is critical for the decision making to gather all the information that is coming from the various sectors. I think we have noticed that mercury is not touching only one sector, but it's touching across all sectors, economic sectors. And it will be very critical to have that coordinated system where data is centrally collected, maybe let's say by REMA, and then it is then channeled towards the various platforms for discussion, for policy formulation, for informed decision making by decision makers within the government. With that, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for your time, and I hand over to you, Patrick.
Most of our participants are now expecting to hear from the meeting key elements. So I will call Fry Mapanda Professor for his brief presentation, to be brief as much as possible, to reserve some times for the participant to ask some questions. It will be the last presentation that we are having today for launching the report to be accessible. Falai, if you are ready, please give us your presentation.
Patrick, I think Prof. Mapanda dropped on the call due to an emergency, so I will take you through the presentation for implementation plan and priorities for action for meeting the obligations of the Minamata Convention. Shall I proceed? Patrick, you can hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Please go ahead. With normally we are
Thank you.
together with different partners and who will just be with us for implementing the priorities highlighted by the Minamata initial assessment. I think this is our opportunity for us to hear from you the intervention needed from our institutions to comply with the provisions of Minamata Convention. Please go ahead with a short time for us to reserve some times for our participants to pose some questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. So I'll take you through national objectives, proposed strategies and actions, and the implementation schedule. So the general objective of the Minamata Convention is to protect human health and the environment from the adverse impacts of mercury, which will also be the overarching objective of the implementation plan. So we're saying Rwanda is focusing on protecting human health and the environment from the adverse impacts of mercury and mercury compounds within Rwanda. So we're looking at exposure of populations to mercury, environmental bioaccumulation in food chains, consumption of mercury and contaminated food. So to set targets and the implementation modalities, this objective was considered. An overall view of things. We look at building and strengthening capacity of gold processing industry regulating authorities to protect miners with a budget of about 620,000, reducing mercury releases to society from the importation and consumption of mercury products with intentional use of mercury, about 90,000, improving solid waste and wastewater management to reduce potential risks of exposure to mercury, that's about 138,000, reducing the exposure of vulnerability of populations, particularly women and children, with about 55,000, developing and adopting technologies for safe handling and storage of mercury, that's about 247,000, with a total budget of 1,150,000. You will notice these objectives were formulated to address the key major areas, those three key major areas that are represented within the inventory. So on gold mining and processing, the background to the problem is that we have about 14,659 kgs of mercury that is being released, and there is need to strengthen technology interventions that gold recovery techniques do not make use of mercury amalgamation. Elsewhere in the region, it is perceived that there is no cheaper, effective alternative used to mercury. So we have to engage these miners with the various technological innovations that are available. First, to work on the reduction in the use of mercury, and where possible to actually move towards elimination. There are various ways where this can be done in terms of developing what we can call demonstration centers, where various technologies that do not use mercury, for example, we have the use of sluicing technology, which are called gravity technologies. We have the use of leaching agents, which are like cyanide, leaching agents, which are less toxic, that can be applied within Rwanda. So these are the kind of actions that we are saying need to be taken under this objective, so that we move from the use of mercury. So on objective one, we are focusing on increasing capacity of REMA and RMB to efficiently conduct regular inspections, which is to monitor these miners, how they are conducting their business, and also in line with point 1.2, to raise awareness among the gold miners and surrounding communities on the potential risk, promote a diversity of mercury-free technologies with the demonstration centers that I was talking about, so that these miners can fully understand that they will recover more gold if they are using more advanced technology which are mercury-free. And two, they'll also then protect the environment, because from our experience, without mentioning to the miners that there is a dollar value in everything that you're doing, your suggestions will not succeed. And then assess and reduce exposure of miners and communities through unintentional release of mercury. Objective number two, on import and consumption of products with intentional use of mercury, which is ranked second highest, and then about 97% is partitioned into general waste, while 1.6 is emitted into air. We are looking at the types of products that we noticed, and you look, the still mercury thermometers that we found in the system, chemicals containing mercury. So again, it boils back to the recommendations that were given during the presentation on legal assessment, that we start on coming up with policy provisions for such objectives to control the importation and use of mercury-containing products, and we promote the subsequent phase out and eventual elimination from the system. On import and consumption of products, we look at legislative, awareness raising, capacity building of regulatory authorities of REMA and other authorities in the, so that they're able to monitor and control and check products that are coming into the country and how they are formulated to ensure that mercury-containing products do not enter into Rwanda. Strengthen the implementation control measures at ports of entry for mercury-containing products. Objective number 3, improving solid waste and wastewater management. Heavy metal contamination of rivers, fresh water will become scarce, and if we continue to pollute, then we have a problem. So we need to focus on this objective, on the sound management of waste. And what we have noted when we conducted the field visit, there is sound waste incineration. Sometimes it accumulates, yes, but the incineration facilities, some of them do not have adequate pollution control devices, and some of the pollution control devices that are used do not destroy mercury per se. They are just destroying other toxic gases other than mercury. So on improving solid waste, we are looking at legislative actions, education and awareness actions, capacitate waste handlers to characterize waste, including mercury concentration in waste, and then promotion of point source segregation, like I alluded before in my previous presentation. On biomass burning and dental amalgam, the problem is that about 49 kgs of mercury are released annually from this sector, and then exposure of women and children happens when people are then taken through dental procedures with dental amalgam containing mercury. So in terms of the actions on this one, we are looking at establishing operational networks of women against mercury to support women in environments exposing them to potential releases of mercury, and hence the promotion and adoption of cooking technologies without biomass, though not very much significant, but it's also an opportunity to feed into other conventions where you look at the climate change and stuff. This convention now then feeds directly into that when you address issues to do with emission releases from that. Legal reforms and phasing out of mercury-containing dental amalgam within the medical sector. On handling, storage, and disposal of mercury waste, mercury is disused and phased out. Products do not currently have a disposal facility within Rwanda. No standards operating procedures were noted to be implemented within this facility. So the actions now we're focusing on establishment of standard operating procedures for environmentally sound disposal and management of mercury-containing waste, establishment of pilot hubs for handling mercury-containing waste from facilities of economic development, and then promotion and the adoption of environmentally sound storage and disposal facilities for mercury-containing waste. In terms of the implementation schedule, we are looking at the Ministry of Environment through REMA, who will then operationalize this implementation plan, working with its various partners, each partner taking each their different pieces of the cake, but working together to achieve one national goal to protect the people of Rwanda from the adverse impacts of mercury and mercury compounds. A multi-sector platform, which is coordinated by a national steering committee, and then we then implement maybe within, let's say, three years, and then an evaluation is done. We continue that way. 5 project implementation subunits will be established to cover 5 identical objectives. Steering committee will ensure coordination of activities. This is all to do with coordination mechanism to ensure that this implementation plan is really rolled out and everyone is responsible and there is accountability in each and every objective. The multi-sector platform will consist of those different structures that are listed on the slide. And then this hinges mainly on adequate resources, technology for the sound management of mercury, and there are also issues to do with the lack of knowledge and capacity, enabling policy and legal framework, including institutional capacity and arrangements. These are where the main challenges that we identified. And before I close, I'm saying these are the things that we need to reflect on probably within this meeting as we close together. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, presenters. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, yes.
So I confirm, can hear.
Thank you, presenters, for taking us through the provision of the Minamata initial assessment report. This is the time for all participants to provide their comments. Thank you to all presenters. This is the time for all participants to provide comment or to request some burning question. The floor is yours.
If I may say so, it's of course questions of all sorts are welcome. So you just let us know who you would like to address or what kind of questions you have. And it is late in the afternoon. That's understandable, but now is the chance, so don't miss it if you have something you would like to know more about.
Don't hesitate also, if I may, to share with us the lessons that you have from this project, and if there are any challenges that you know about or that you identified, it's also a good moment to discuss this. Thank you.
For the nice presentations and for organizing this event. So my question goes to all experts who did this research, but also to UNITAR and UNIDO. And it's about the accuracy of the toolkits that were used to estimate the mercury emission from different categories. For example, I saw for ramps that you estimated around 4-point-something kilograms, while we have a big number of ramps with mercury that have been imported in Rwanda. And most of them, they have not less than 2 milligrams each. So I'd like to understand your experience regarding the accuracy of the toolkits toward the emission or the release of mercury. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a good question. If you will allow me to ask to answer, Brian, I hope that's okay. Yeah. So the toolkit depends for many data. It depends. Sorry, the inventory for Rwanda for many source categories depend on statistics from trade, for example, trade statistics or statistics on metal production and so on and so forth. And for example, for lamps, what you say is right, that the mercury concentrations per lamp would be in order of a few milligrams. But if you add that up, you actually need to have very, very many lamps to have a major input of mercury with lamps. Uh, for most countries, lamps is not a big amount of mercury, but it is the type of mercury product that gets into every home. So there's a risk of exposure if the lamp breaks and so on, or if it's not probably disposed when it's not working anymore. Um, there, there is an inherent uncertainty in the estimations. So this could come from the type of data used, so what we call the activity rates. But if Rwanda has effective custom services and effective shipping companies, then for some of these products, it's quite easy to get data. And we would imagine that those for lamps and so on would be quite good. Then there is the aspect of using these default factors that are not necessarily regional. For mercury products, they're probably pretty good. But for things like gold ore, like Brian said, to have a closer estimate, it would be very good to have measurements of how much mercury is in the gold ore, just at the point of where it enters the processing in industrial gold production. So this is something that you could improve your inventory with. Don't expect, extreme accuracy. That is not what we are out for. We cannot get that without having much more data and having local input and output factors. And that takes a lot of effort, and it would not change your results much, except in the case of primary metal mining. I think that is where it could change your results. It might be higher, it might be lower. Actually, the mercury concentrations in gold ores can change. There are some regional world scale patterns, but there may be local changes also depending on your local geology. So that could change much, but it would probably still, it would not mean that industrial gold production is not an important sector. It will still be important. So even if there is an uncertainty of plus minus 50% or something, that's not to worry about. This is something you can refine over the years. The main thing that we get with these inventories is to seeing which are the main sectors where mercury releases and emissions happen, and then we can dive deeper as we improve our estimates over time. Thank you. Thank you for the question, by the way. I'm not sure I've said that. It's very, very useful that we get questions. It's a good chance for shedding more light on things.
So is there any research that tried to compare the true results and the estimations from the default values that you use when you apply the toolkit?
Yes, and thank you for that follow-up question. There are a few examples where local data have been collected where we could compare the toolkit with other inventory efforts. So basically using the toolkit all the time because it's just a method, but putting local calculation factors instead, and thereby improving the results. And it can mean something. But still, we need much more data for developing countries to make better comparisons for that. The toolkit is can in principle be completely accurate if you have the data for it. It has this possibility, but you need a lot of data to increase the accuracy. And for most countries, it's not possible. So, but you can improve over time. So I hope that this doesn't give you the impression that the toolkit is not usable, because certainly it is. On the other hand, what we need to realize is that all data are associated with uncertainty, meaning that even if you measure from the chimney of a factory, there are changes over time depending on raw materials changes, procedure changes, and so on. This is just how nature and reality is.
Say that the toolkit is not useful, but we, as a scientist, you have to think and know how accurate the toolkit is. How accurate the toolkit is, especially in the context of developing countries where I don't have many data. So that was my concern. Otherwise, I know the toolkit that is used for POPs, especially industrial POPs, estimation based on what you have on data that are available. But I've been always asking myself how those toolkits are accurate, especially in our countries where data are not enough.
Yes, that's a relevant remark.
Some values, you ask yourself whether they are reflecting the real context. Or...
Yes, that's understandable. But I can tell you that the Mercury toolkit is much more precise than the dioxins and furans toolkit, because it is, even though we have more data, it is actually less complex than the dioxins and furans inventory work. So yeah, we have much more precision here. That's my estimation. But we would be happy to, if you have ideas for projects on how to compare local data with toolkit defaults, we would be very interested in working with you. We really welcome that if you can raise money for that, and we're happy to help, by the way.
Oh, yes. Thank you, Chair, for this time for questions and comments. My name is Ise Zirahiga. I'm here presenting Rwanda Food and Drug Authority. I appreciate the red presentations past, but I would like just to request some clarifications, specifically for the presentation of Mrs. Aloisi. One of the slides, she mentioned about the regulation governing the registration of pesticides, laboratory, cleaning chemicals, and so on and so forth. And among the gaps, she said the regulation does not explicitly mention mercury-based agrochemicals. I'm not sure whether I'm right, but she mentioned about that. However, I would like just to ask her whether she has consulted the ministerial order of 26 February 2016, number 20/38, whether she has consulted the ministerial order to complement or to get much more information about the prohibited chemicals. That's one. Secondly, I want to clarify that maybe there is a confusion between the mandate of the authority, Rwanda FDA, that should be not confusing in terms of the data we have got. I'm afraid the agrochemicals are not part of the mandate of Rwanda Food and Drug Authority. I'm afraid of that. So we need to clarify that, and then maybe the report, is the report the final report? Yes, MIA report, or is it accessible to the public to read it? And maybe if there is a room of comments or clarifying something, kindly let us know, and then we can work on. I submit.
Yeah, we normally what we did with what you call institutional capacity. We refer on the law establishing the institution, for example, going through the mandate of the institution. I know we can't confuse the RICA and the FDA. I know concerning the agrochemicals and something like that. I know. So, but let her clarify the question. But I know it is well articulated in the report.
Thank you very much for a good question. Yes, the ministerial order you are mentioning, I talked about it, referring to the law associated to, because there is a law and there is the ministerial order stating the list of the chemicals. Of course, I consulted, mercury is not listed. That's why I said it's not explicitly. When I'm saying explicitly, I mean the mercury, the word mercury is mentioned in the list. But when we are talking about the chemicals in general, then it's like it's not explicit. The mercury itself, it's not mentioned. That is the meaning. And regarding the mandates of RICA and FDA, I know that even you working at the two institutions, sometimes there is a confusion on the mandate. But going through the reports or the mandate, although I have not presented the mandates here, also the mandates for each institution were mentioned based on the information provided by respondent, but also from the different websites providing the mandates of the institutions. Thank you.
Any other question? Okay. If no any other question, I would like to take this opportunity and thank everyone for being with us today, for launching this important report that is going to guide us. I will give 1 minute to Jacob to reflect or to have some message to us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think, in fact, it should be Guillaume, but from my side, I wish you good luck with the implementation. There's a lot of work to do, and you let us know if you need some help. We will be happy to assist.
Thank you.
And on my side, I would just wanted to thank you. Thanks in particular, Mrs. Juliette Cabéger, REMA's Director General, for constant support throughout the project. To thanks also the entire REMA team, the members of the steering committee and the national consultants for their involvement in the project, which was instrumental in achieving the results. And finally, also UNITA would like to thank UNIDO and the JEF for the oversight and financial support. By participating in the Minamata initial assessment process, UNIDO and UNITA are strengthening their collaboration with Rwanda and are committed to supporting the country in its effort to control harmful pollutants such as mercury. Once again, UNITA is confident that the work carried out will contribute to the future work of the convention. It hopes that the country will succeed in eliminating the risks caused by mercury on its territory. Thank you all for your participation in this workshop, and I wish you a good end of the day.
Thank you very much, Helmin.
I think Elmine had some other commitments, and unfortunately, she's not able to be here. Yes, she's not here.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate your continued support toward the implementation of Minamata Convention. Thank you very much.
Thank you.